We are Muskegon County at Work, spotlighting workers of local governments throughout our county, revealing what it takes to make our communities comfortable and safe. Hello, everyone. DJ Hilson here, and we're doing Muskegon County Municipalities at Work. And today, I have with me a very special guest, a gentleman I've known for quite some time, actually, Mr. Patrick Finnegan. Current title is Deputy Circuit Court Administrator.
That's correct.
Did I get that correct?
That's correct, yep.
Well, thank you, Patrick, for being here today. It is always a pleasure to have a conversation with you.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
So let's start, I always like to start with my guests sort of introducing themselves, talking a little bit about themselves, and maybe, since we're focused on Muskegon County, your journey into Muskegon County and why you're here.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was fortunate enough, I grew up in Shiawassee County. I was born in Owasso, in between Flint and Lansing, kind of a rural community. I was fortunate enough when I was in my middle school years, my parents moved us to Whitehall, and I spent 6th, 7th, and 8th grade middle school years in Whitehall. Now, we moved back home to Shiawassee County. I went to Corunna High School and graduated from Corunna High School there. But I always kind of had a little bit of a special place in my heart for Whitehall. I played hockey here in Muskegon when I was younger, and had an affinity for this community from that time. And went to college at the University of Michigan. Went to law school at Cooley Law School, and there was an opportunity after law school to come back and work in Muskegon in the prosecutor's office. And I thought to myself then, boy, I remember those times, and this is just going to be a great opportunity, too good for me to pass up. So I came here, started working in the prosecutor's office, worked with you for a bit, and then there was an opportunity for me to actually join the family court when we shifted roles of a prosecutor function to the family court. And that really kind of started me on the way toward court administration in a lot of ways. Took a bit of a hiatus and went to New York City, where I stayed with my girlfriend there. That was really the reason that I went to New York. It was also kind of an opportunity for me to see, is this something that I can do? Can I make a living there? Can I survive in that environment? Found out I could, and my girlfriend and I decided if we're going to raise a family and we're going to be together, New York is not the place to do it. And once again, that calling of Muskegon and Muskegon County came back in my head, and there just so happened to be the opportunity in 2016 to come back and be the district court administrator. So I was very fortunate to take on that role, and we moved to Muskegon, and I've been here ever since until last year. I transferred from the district court as the district court administrator to become the deputy circuit court administrator. So that's and now we're raising our family here in Muskegon, and here's where we're going to stay.
Well, that's fantastic. I do remember the day that I learned that you were coming back to Muskegon. I was pretty happy, pretty excited about that. You do bring a different energy, a different vibe, if you will, into the courthouse. So it was great to have you back. Talk to me a little bit about that transition. Obviously you did a lot of work, I'll say, as an associate or assistant prosecutor.
Yep.
And then transitioning into that administrative role, what did you notice as the differences and the challenges?
Yeah, and that was one of the things, too, that I didn't know at the time just what I was going to be getting into. What I knew was that we had a very forward-thinking court administrator at the time who was really pushing the envelope procedurally of some of the things that were happening, and that being the change at that time to take what was traditionally a prosecutorial function of establishing paternity and child support cases and bringing that into the fold of the family court and having that really internal. There were only a couple of courts in the state that were doing it at that time. And Muskegon, kind of, again, being on the cutting edge, was going to be the next, really the first major court across the state that was going to do that. Now, 10 years on, that is mostly the way that courts are established. That's how most family courts are established. So, I came over as the staff attorney for the family court from the prosecutor's office. And it was primarily what's called a 4D function. When we talk about 4D, we're talking about Title 4D of the Social Security Act, filing lawsuits on behalf of the people of the state of Michigan to establish paternity in cases where children who are receiving assistance through the state have not had their legal fatherhood established, and also establishing child support obligations to make sure that those children are supported. So in doing that, it opened up a bunch of avenues to start working more collaboratively with other aspects of the family court. If we're talking about paternity and we're talking about child support, well, maybe we can start talking about issues of custody and issues of parenting time, things that aren't necessarily strictly 4D functions where the prosecutor's function kind of left off. Here's a way for us to look at families a little bit more holistically. And as we started doing that and we started pushing that envelope, it meant that, well, okay, maybe Patrick can supervise a few more employees. Maybe we can take some lead in some initiatives. And what I didn't realize was happening was I was learning a bit about how to run a court and how court operations work. And that really laid the groundwork for me to be able to move into administration. Yep. Sure.
So, all right. So, obviously, I think as people coming in and out of the courthouse, they're coming in for various reasons, and may not see necessarily behind the curtain.
Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely.
And I think part of what I'd like you to talk about is that behind the curtain. Talk a little bit about your district court experience. I want to. We'll talk a little bit about that. I do want to focus on the circuit court, but behind the curtain, what's going on?
Yeah. So many times when folks may ask me, what do you do? And I say, I'm a court administrator. I work in court administration. Invariably, the next question is, what is that? How does that work? Who are these people? And I often say, if you haven't heard of me, that's usually a good thing. That means that things are working the way they should. So to describe really what a court administrator is or what a court administrator does and what court administration means, it's really, the court administrator is the chief of staff. The Supreme Court appoints a chief judge for each court every 2 years. That chief judge delegates the administrative responsibilities that are entrusted to them to an administrator and administrative team to make sure that the court runs appropriately. So think of it as everything that takes place not in the courtroom. All the things that are necessary in order to make sure that the court is financed, to make sure that the case files are maintained and are appropriately flowing through the staff, making sure that the facilities are properly managed, and everything else in between. When I first came back, and like I said, I was feeling my way into what does this really mean to be a court administrator. I had only been at my desk probably a couple of days, and in walks Judge Waringo, whose office happened to be right next to mine, and he's holding a cup of coffee, and he says to me, Patrick, I have it on some authority that the men's bathroom is flooding, and took a big sip and then walked away. And suddenly I realized, okay, this falls within my purview to help manage. I didn't expect that, but it can be those types of things. And what I've found is that there's an awful lot that goes into making sure that not just the institution of the court, but justice is managed, but making sure that all of the resources are marshaled appropriately so that can actually happen on those days within the four walls of a courtroom that a hearing is held. And it also means after that hearing is held. What happens to those court orders? How do we make sure that those court orders are properly enforced? How do we make sure that the other county entities that are impacted by those orders are informed of them? And that takes a huge staff. When you come to the courthouse, the courtroom is the show place, but there's an awful lot of office space that are dedicated there to making sure that everything works before that hearing takes place and after that hearing takes place. And that's really the primary function of court administration.
Now, obviously, as we move into technology, there's a lot of changes. I'll say in the system itself, the court system itself, trying to make it more efficient. Can you talk a little bit about how the courts are trying to adapt to this change in technology and some of the benefits that Muskegon County has seen as a result?
Absolutely. So one of the things that I'm really excited about working in the circuit court is that we were also a bit on the front edge all 10 years ago now in terms of implementing a paperless court file. And what that means largely is that documents still now are filed primarily in paper for the most part. But the court ingests those documents into an electronic database. We call it OnBase. It's our electronic content management system. And they've built routing rules that allow those documents to flow to the entities that need them, whether that be clerks for scheduling, whether that be for judicial secretaries, whether that be directly to the judge for signature. The avenues are massive. But the folks that are harnessing that technology make it much more efficient in order for us to manage than the paper file. There's some drawbacks in that sometimes not only do you have to have expertise and technical resources in order to do that, but there's a learning curve. And for the judiciary particularly, I think it's one of those things that's a bit difficult because as an institution, we're always looking backwards, right? All of the facts that come into a courthouse, they already happened in the past. The court's going to look back to see what law has been applied in the past. All the statutes that we're going to apply, they were written in the past. By nature, the judiciary looks backward first. So it's tough for the judiciary to be a forward-thinking and progressive institution. But I'm really proud of the fact that the Muskegon County is one of the counties and one of the courts that has started to leverage this technology, and we're a little bit ahead of where the state's at. So the state as a whole is implementing what is called MyFile technology, and they're starting to roll this out across the state, which is going to require attorneys to file all of their documents with the court electronically through an online portal, and then for the courts to have the ability to ingest those documents electronically, and then to use an internal document management system that allows those documents to flow. So we were really on the cusp of making sure that took place long before the state required it. So we're able to actually help, I think, in many ways, bend and shape what that's going to look like in the future. And I think that's probably the biggest thing that's changing courts across the state right now. And it's got a lot of people very nervous. It's got a lot of long tenured court employees apprehensive about how this is going to work because we're very used to dealing with paper documents. But this is just another step in the progress of implementing technology in the courtroom. And another aspect of that now, I mean, when we think of traditionally how the courtroom functions, it's a lot different today than it used to be. I mean, now with the microphones, the cameras that are utilized in the courtroom to capture the court record. Long gone are the days of having a stenographer, typing in shorthand, or stenographers that would write in shorthand to capture the court record. All of that is maintained on audio and video record and preserved. The technology in the courtroom that allows for the capture of evidence, for example, electronically, displaying evidence, videos, it is now that is something that is omnipresent in nearly every hearing, making sure that there's some sort of digital record that's taking place, and we're much more equipped to be able to do that now than we have been in the past.
Talk a little bit. Well, certainly before I ask my question, I mean, obviously technology is going to provide those efficiencies as you've certainly described, and I think open the door to more opportunities. Probably maybe even increase the volume than decrease the volume.
Yeah.
But the capacity to maintain that, it'll be a lot different.
Sure, and I think that's one of the things too that court administration is it's an important function of, is making sure that the court is accessible to the general public and making sure that people have ways to access it. And let's be honest, that's how people are interacting with not just with one another, but with their local institutions is largely online. So making sure that we have resources that are available online for people to be able to learn about what they need to know in order to file with the court, for example, or how to access the family court services, for example, that we have the staff that are available to help service individuals in the family court in particular. They're interacting largely not so much in person anymore, but doing so online. And what that does is open up the accessibility of the court to more people. So yeah, I think we probably do see more filings as a result of that. We do see people engaging with the court a little bit more as a result of that. And that means that we have to have those efficiencies in place in order to properly manage the flow so that folks are still getting a level of service that they expect and deserve, frankly. And that's something that it's certainly a challenge, but it's one that I think, and if you think about it in the broad scheme, it's part of our duty and our obligation to make sure that we're providing the service that we need to our citizens.
And ultimately, for people who are watching this and wondering, I mean, the best way to start for example, let's say you want to file a custody case or a paternity case or a civil lawsuit. and you're exploring it without the advice of an attorney, which I wouldn't recommend, but let's say you are, Muskegon County's website.
Yep.
Is that the sort of the starting place?
It's one avenue. What I would certainly recommend folks that are, if they're looking for legal help and they're looking to represent themselves as a self-represented litigant, I would, and this is what our staff often do as well too, is to send them to MunisciganLegalHelp.org. It's a fantastic resource that's provided free. Anybody can access this website. We have a legal self-help center located on the 6th floor of the county building. You can come down and utilize that resource there if you'd like. Put you right in the heart of where things are happening, and then have easy access to be able to file documents that are created through legal self-help or through MunisciganLegalHelp.org. But also, yeah, you can start on the county's website and you can get information there from the court page, or you can come in and you can talk to staff as well. We're going to be there. We and this is always one thing it's a tough piece for people to understand. Our staff are there to help with procedure. They're there to help people understand how to do certain things. Oftentimes, individuals come in, and that's the initial place. How do I do this? But a very close question to that is, what should I do? Or that should component comes in, and that's the part that's advice, right? And that's the part where you need counsel to advise you on this is what you should or you shouldn't do. Our staff can tell you how to do something. What's the procedure? What's the process? How is this going to flow? And explain those things. But when it comes down to should I do this or shouldn't I do this? Should I go this avenue or that avenue? Then that's really where you need an attorney to help guide you. But starting at the website, starting with MunisciganLegalHelp.org, depending on what your issue is, fantastic resources there. Maybe you're going to represent yourself in a divorce. There are forms that can be generated based on the questionnaires that you can ask there. Maybe you need help with child support. The contact information for calling the Office of Child Support and starting a case there. There's a little more help when we talk about those 4D functions, because those are things in which we have attorneys within the family court that will take over and, on behalf of the people of the state of Michigan, will represent folks to establish a child support obligation, for example, or establish paternity. But if it's a custody or parenting time issue, my first recommendation is go to MunisciganLegalHelp.org. Fill out the questionnaire form. They can help guide you into what you need, or come in and talk to one of our folks. We can give you the forms directly.
Let's talk a little bit about the staff that you've talked about. The folks, the actual live bodies, because again, there is a difference between an automated phone system, a website, and then talking to somebody face to face. How many folks are you sort of overseeing in the circuit court division? Yeah,
so the entire third floor of the courthouse is just the family court. We also occupy the fourth floor of the building with courtrooms. The sixth floor as well has staff, and most of the fifth floor, where the prosecutor's offices, has two probate courtrooms there as well. All told, the family court staff is about 75 individuals. If you add the circuit court staff into that, we're getting closer to 100. And if you add the juvenile detention center, which the court also manages, we're upwards of 130 folks total. So they're doing everything from those face-to-face interactions, answering communications via email or text message or across the counter, our caseworkers. They're the folks that are digesting all of the orders of the court that come in their written form, as the court speaks only through its written orders. So those written orders come in. We've got to interpret those and put them into our systems, our databases, to make sure that they can be enforced. So we distill them. There's staff that distill them and put them into the system so that they can be managed. We also have staff that are managing all of the financials of the court, which is pretty significant. And when you talk about, particularly in the realm of child support, an awful lot of financials in terms of the accounting and the records, and making sure that the appropriate amounts are being charged, are being collected, are being dispersed appropriately. There's a huge component of court finance. And then also, there's the legal component. We also employ, referees to assist the judges in making recommendations about decisions. We're talking about bailiffs and judicial secretaries to manage the judges' calendars. We're also talking about the folks that help run our juvenile detention center when there are youth and juveniles that need to be detained for a period of time, whether that's before they're adjudicated or after, that maintain that facility. And running a 24/7 facility has its own issues involved with it. So yeah, there's a great breadth of jobs and opportunities, and I would encourage anybody that's interested in working for the judiciary as well to visit the county's human resources site if there's positions that you're interested in. We're always actively recruiting folks to fill those as well.
I want to put a pin in that because I want to come back to that. But the one thing that I really want you to explain, one of the things I'd like you to explain is there's been a couple of major shifts in the law.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes, well, I don't think, I know the policymakers sometimes don't fully grasp the direct and indirect ripple effects that these big changes have on the court system. The two I want you to kind of highlight are the change in the expungement law, what that did for the court, and just recently the big shift in the juvenile justice, and what that meant, and sort of how quickly court staff had to sort of pivot in order to accommodate what is now the law.
Absolutely, and as you said, we follow what the law is. We don't make the laws necessarily. A lot of them come from our legislature, and we're entrusted with implementing them. And the court rules too have changed a lot significantly in the last several years. The area of set aside, or what we commonly call expungement, really turned on its head the court's obligation to try and manage what it meant for criminal convictions to be set aside. And what I mean by that is, historically, as with any court case, an individual had to petition the court. You had to come to the court and ask the court for some type of relief. And that allowed the court to manage how things were going to be processed. We would receive the filing. We could schedule a hearing. We would know what the hearing is. We could document what took place, and things would move forward, and we maintain that record. Well, the legislature, I think the intentions were good, came in and said, listen, we're going to automatically start expunging criminal records. And every time I've used that term automatic, I've used the air quotes because nothing really happens automatically in this type of system. So there's guidelines that have now been set up by the statute in terms of when certain convictions fall off. And the Michigan State Police and the Department of Technology Management Budget at the state level have done their level best to try and create computer programs that are supposed to manage these automatic set-asides. But the fact of the matter is there's a human being that's on the front end of entering that data, and there's a human being on the back end that's having to process what these reports are telling you and what's happening within our internal systems. And then there are human beings that are affected by them as well. And that's where things always get a little bit messy. If the data isn't exactly right when it gets entered, if the data that's coming from the system maybe doesn't reflect exactly what took place in the court record, there are errors and there are problems, and that means human beings have to work those things through. So it's really taken the burden or the onus off the individuals to come and file and said, okay, this is automatic, and shifted it to the court to figure out what does automatic mean. And it also makes a big question about how we maintain our records. What it also has meant is that a lot of records that historically were just public are now non-public. So the court still maintains that record of a conviction, but that record is now non-public and is available only to court staff, law enforcement, when it comes to being able to disseminate what took place. So that was a huge shift, and it's happened over the course of the last couple of years. I think now we're starting to finally catch some runway in terms of people are getting used to how this works and used to how to process it. But I say that just as juvenile set-asides are still that there was kind of the third prong to come into play. We're still working through that as well. The other aspect you asked about
juvenile justice
change. Legislation change really just took effect here just this past fall. Has really caused us to have to reformat how we handle juvenile justice. What do we do when we process these cases? And historically, where we were managing juvenile adjudications on a probationary basis, deciding what's intensive probation, formal probation. Really now what we're doing is deciding who needs to have probation and what community-based resources are we going to provide and who can we divert away from the system. That's really what the legislation is calling for. So we're in the process right now of revitalizing our juvenile probation group, doing a split with our juvenile probation officers, just hired some new ones, to really focus on the assessment piece when individuals are coming into the system. that intake component, understanding all of the dynamics that are going on. It's not just about this juvenile, but about their family, about what's happening in their lives right now. Trying to do our best to make assessments about their risks and their needs, using standardized tools and evidence-based tools in order to make those assessments, getting good at making those assessments and making appropriate recommendations to the court, and then diverting, frankly, as many folks as possible away from the system. Legislation also changed, which meant that we're no longer going to be imposing or collecting on juvenile fines and costs. Those are things that historically were always kind of a part of the juvenile criminal justice process. Now they're no longer assessed. So that impacts court finances, impacts county finances as well. But really focusing on more of a holistic rehabilitative model, diverting youthful offenders whenever possible, and then having those individuals that are on probation post-adjudication connected with the community as much as possible as well. Keeping them in our community, if that means in the juvenile detention center, making sure that the treatment that they're receiving is community-based treatment within our juvenile detention center, but primarily having those probation officers that are working with those youth and working with those families, connecting them with community-based resources.
Yeah, I mean, I think people, again, folks listening to this or seeing this, I hope appreciate this idea that, words on paper do make a difference, especially when it comes out of Lansing.
Yeah.
And the sometimes huge task laid upon the entities that are directly affected in sort of making that shift. And it's not an overnight change.
No, it's not. And of course, as an administrator, one of the main questions that always comes up is funding. Anything is how are these things going to be funded? And oftentimes that's the part that is often forgot in Lansing or in Washington when it comes to changes in legislation that are going to trickle down and impact how we do things on a local level is, well, how are we going to pay for those things? And oftentimes that's left to us as local governments to try and figure out. Now, I happen to be a big proponent of the fact that we can work on a local level to figure those things out and work with our Board of Commissioners, work with our fellow department heads in the county and our county administration. There's a big shift that's taking place right now that's on the fast track in terms of trial court funding in Michigan. And this is a train that is leaving the station to reformat how trial courts are funded across this state. Historically, trial courts have always been locally funded. Now, it's a bit of a civics lesson, but I mean, we are that separate yet co-equal branch of government. And that's one of the things that's unique about working in the judiciary and that I really love about it is that these notions, these things that are in the news now about separation of powers, they apply right here on our local level as well. So the judiciary, while our employees work for the judiciary, they're still funded by our local Muskegon County government primarily. And that is potentially changing. They're looking at avenues of ways to collect data from all the courts across the state to create a report for the legislature to consider a new funding model that would come from Lansing. Ideally, the idea is that helps insulate the judiciary and its independence. But it also, I think the idea is to make trial courts across the state a little bit more evenly funded. I'm skeptical of that just because I like working with you, working with all of the other local officials about how our local courts are funded. We'll see how this plays out, and of course we're gonna follow the law, whatever the law means. But there's a big shift coming in terms of how trial courts are going to be funded going forward.
Talk a little bit about, I think, people need to appreciate that you sort of answer to different, well, you answer to a group, but different individuals, right?
Yeah.
And, I'm not looking to put you on the hot seat here or to get you in any trouble. So a disclaimer to anybody who thinks I'm trying to be offensive here, I'm not. But, I mean, certainly, I think if you could talk a little bit about the challenges, but also how things are done here in Muskegon County and the communication that's happening with, I'll say, quote unquote, your bosses.
Yeah. And so if you were to sit around and think up a way to design an organizational structure, you would never pick how trial courts are organized. And the best analogy that I've heard that I can come up with to describe where court administration fits is really we're kind of in an hourglass. You have the judges, and like I mentioned before, the chief judge is appointed by the Supreme Court. He is really the first among equals on the bench. They have the administrative responsibility, but they all are independently elected officials, and we all report as administration and staff. We report to the judges collectively, but the chief judge primarily. They have the power at the top of the hourglass, right? There's a tiny little bottleneck, and that's really where administration is. And that's where all the things that flow down from the judges to the court. And then there's the staff below, and those are the folks that do the lion's share of all the work that really has to be done for a child court to organize. So as administrators, we're kind of really just in that tiny little bottleneck in the middle. What is difficult about that is you serve many masters, obviously. But what also is unique about this organizational structure is that it allows us to really give some deference to different points of view, to make us consider what our leadership is thinking, and making sure that our policies are aligned with that. And sometimes that means we've got to be a little bit creative, and we certainly have to, I think as administrators, do our level best to make sure that we're as collaborative as possible. And that means building consensus whenever we possibly can. Judges are nonpartisan, but they are certainly not apolitical. They're political creatures as well. So we have to take that into consideration. One of the things that I am really appreciative of, and this comes from my time in the district court, and now even my time in the circuit court, is that I've found that if you're able to get judges to sit down, talk with one another, talk with the administration about what problems we're facing and how to remedy them, when they're in the room, they're discussing like I said, as equals or as the first among equals. They all have really good ideas, and when you hear out their perspectives, I mean, these are people they're thoughtful people by nature, right? Their perspectives often have a lot of validity. And if you can find artful ways to implement and to take some guidance from a lot of the wisdom that they have in implementing our policies and our procedures, the community is better served.
So, obviously, as you indicated, several employees, different job opportunities. Talk a little bit about, for those who are maybe thinking that, I'd like to get in and be a part of that system, best avenue. Yeah.
So, I mean, first and foremost, visit the Muskegon County Human Resources page and look under the court section for job postings that are there. Like I mentioned, we're always actively recruiting, it seems right now. Gone are the days where you had folks that spent 20, 30 years working in positions within the court. We expect and anticipate that turnover is a little bit different now. So there are more opportunities, frankly, today than there were in the past. Also, I happen to think it's a great, not just opportunity, but it's an honor to be able to work in the judiciary. Unlike the legislative side of things, where they have the power of the purse, or unlike the executive functions where they're enforcing our laws. What the judiciary has is its integrity, and that to me is the part that draws me to work to this branch of government, because it gives us an opportunity to be our very best and to show that we can be our best day in and day out. So if you're feeling that call to public service, and you feel that there's something that you can do to better our community, more and more often the judiciary is being looked at as a social services type of organization. So I would encourage folks to look at some of those job opportunities. That could be working in the juvenile detention center directly with youth, managing youth there and making sure that they're provided with the best services. That could be working as a clerk in our office, processing documents, meeting with people, helping to explain the judicial process. If you've got a passion for finance, God knows I don't, but some folks do. There are opportunities there in managing all of the monies that the court has to take place or has to manage in order to be efficient. So and also roles in leadership. We just hired a new supervisor in our court too. So I mean, if there are people that have degrees in public administration, degrees even in business administration, there are probably going to be opportunities in courts, not just in Muskegon, but actually across the state. And I should also mention too that although it's a trend for court administrators for us to be lawyers, that's certainly not necessarily the case either. You can certainly get in court administration without having a strong legal background. It's not necessarily something that you have to have. You could have a strong business background, strong personnel background.
Excellent. Well, listen, Patrick, thank you so much for spending time today, really helping to educate as I indicated, kind of behind the scenes, behind the curtain of what makes courts it function, and what people would normally see and understand. So really appreciate that. Obviously appreciate the role that you serve. It's been a pleasure working with you at various levels in your career, and I look forward to that continued relationship.
It's my pleasure, and I look forward to it as well. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Appreciate it.
That's all we have for this episode of Muskegon County Municipalities at Work. Thank you so much for joining us. And this vision doesn't happen without the insight and ingenuity of one Mr. Mike Vogus.